Thank you for that introduction. I'm quite frightened now.
So, as has been trailed, we were asked to give a keynote at a local development conference. It was due to start in about, I think it was February year before last, something like that. And so about 6 months previously, the organizer said, "So what are you going to talk about?" Having agreed to give this keynote. And we looked at each other and thought, now that's a good question. So we came up with something to talk about.
Have you got the original spec, Harry?
I do. I have the original specification, the documentation written up front for our first keynote, which was Harry and Rupert present a survey of cults and heresies concerned with Agile practices and the Agile manifesto, culminating in a new ad hoc manifesto for a new decade. Doctrinal purists are invited to be appalled.
So it's a bit of a mouthful for a start.
And also, it seemed like a really good idea at the time, as so many pieces of documentation written for a purely marketing function do. Then we started doing some research into how we might deliver such a keynote. As has been mentioned, we work in a team of about 20 people in a software company that we run as well. We don't have massive experience of big corporate rollouts of Agile. We have much experience of confidently telling customers that we practice Agile software development.
So we thought we might start with some research. It would have been a good idea, I think, to, for example, familiarise ourselves with the Agile manifesto.
Yes.
We could have gone further. We could have, since they are, as far as I'm aware, all still living.
Yes.
We could have contacted the people who actually wrote it, emailed them, maybe had a conversation. We're both lazy and very English and shy, so we didn't do that.
No, what we did, we just read a few blog posts. And we found that my first call, which is having seen a lot of big large-scale Agile methodologies practiced from outside, having read some blog posts by some Agile consultants, I thought, do you know, this does sound a little like a cargo cult.
The cargo cults of Polynesia.
Who, during the Second World War, watched as... Do you all know this metaphor, by the way?
Show us your hand if you know what we're about to say.
Perfect. That'll do. So that's less than half, right? So
we can do it anyway then, right?
Yeah, we'll just do it quicker. So, during the Second World War, the American Air Force arrived at many Polynesian, many Pacific islands. They built temporary landing strips, and they appeared in their planes out of the sky, and they disgorged
cigarettes and chocolate.
Cigarettes, chocolate, nylon stockings, cans of beef, wonders, such that the islanders had never seen. And I thought that would be a brilliant presentation. We could do the whole thing like some riff on America and its practices when it comes to underdeveloped countries.
Slow down, Harry. You missed the punchline. Or are you getting it?
Well, we'll see.
Okay.
If everyone laughs, it was a punchline. If they don't, it was just something I said, right?
Test-driven development.
Yeah, test-driven development of joke. So, and we did some research on this, and we found that at Lunivore, Liz Keogh had written precisely that speech and delivered it very successfully and blogged about it 7 years before we had the idea.
So for those of you who are still in the dark, the thing that happened once the Americans left the Pacific after the end of the Second World War is that the islanders would attempt to recreate their rituals. They would build landing strips. They would stand at the end of them, waving the aeroplanes in from the sky in the expectation that this summoning would bring them the chocolate and nylons that they so deeply desired. And Liz Keogh, excellent blog post if you ever get around to read it, has pointed out that a number of organisations practice Agile in this manner. They believe that if you do the right motions, the magic will happen.
And everything will just work. And better software will come out of the end of these processes. once you've made your air traffic control lights out of straw and the like.
So it turned out that our first idea had already been done better by somebody else 7 years ago in about 250 words.
So, we went back to the source. We actually did the due diligence. Part of the inspiration for this talk was that I'd gone to another conference, a UK GovCamp, where people in government digital had got together and talked about things they liked in developing software, how it could be done better, how it worked, how it didn't. There was a session there called Agile Sucks. Designed to be provocative, designed to make people think. People came in, they sat down, they were in entrenched positions on either side. People lobbed verbal grenades at each other across a divide formed by a barricade made out of piled up desks. Some of these things aren't true.
He has a habit of exaggeration.
But what did happen is that when someone said, how many tenets are there in the Agile manifesto? Nobody present could answer. But nobody at this session designed to discuss Agile could remember what the Agile manifesto said, despite the fact that at least half of them were wholeheartedly in favour of it.
There are lots of good things I haven't read too.
Yeah, so I was one of those people who hadn't actually read it for a while and couldn't remember. And so we went back, when we decided to do this talk, having done our research, we went back to the original text and we read it again.
That proved to us to be quite a revelation, as you are about to discover.
Because it turns out that if you go back to the original document, if rather than the practices that have arisen around it, you examine the original text, do you know what? It absolutely rocks. I mean, it's really, really good.
So, oh no!
Does your pointer not work?
No, it's good. I've skipped a slide already. This is
Matt,
what's going on.
You call them slides, they're not really
Pause
slides.
for a moment to give a shout out to Olga, who after only 5 minutes acquaintance with us before lunch, correctly predicted our first slide.
So this is the first slide. This is how we imagine it was on the mountain top.
When they wrote the thing, right?
When they wrote the thing. We imagine that a group of mid-40 beardy white guys sat around a table on top of a mountain, perhaps drinking beer, coming up with some stuff they all felt they could agree to, despite their different backgrounds and practices. This is what we think it looked like. I fondly imagine that some of the fine detail was filled in by one of them nipping down very late at night with a Sharpie and just like scribbling out an offending word.
A little edit here and there.
We imagine that it was a bit like the process of coming up with the Nicene Creed, which is the sort of fundamental tenets of Christianity, which we believe happened at the Council of Nicaea in Turkey and in modern-day Turkey, when some bishops did the same thing and formulated what the books would be in the New Testament. Something like that.
So, good, we've done that bit now.
Yeah.
Should we do the winding back in time thing? Where
Yep.
you say, when we reread the Agile Manifesto, we discovered
But it really rocks.
we're back on track.
Yeah, back on track. Back in black. No. Yeah, so the Agile Manifesto really rocks. Sorry, that's the wrong way round. Yeah. That way. Yeah. So, as with any religious text, as well as the practices that have built up around it, the cargo cult that Lunivore describes, there would, at the same time, have been bodies of supporting text that never quite made it into the final cut. Some documents that are around at roughly the same time that the disciples that we saw earlier could have used to come up with the Agile Manifesto, but in the end, for whatever reason, didn't.
Yeah, we'd call those in biblical studies the Apocrypha, right?
Mm-hmm. So,
the new plan that we followed.
Our new plan for the rest of this speech is to come up with some heresies formed in the name of the original text, and maybe burn some people later on, to come up with a list of the Apocrypha that were around at the time, and to re-examine the Agile manifesto a bit.
Yeah, not the wholesale rewriting we had originally and rather rudely imagined, but just maybe a bit.
Not the staggering act of hubris of assuming it was all a bit old-fashioned now and we'd got beyond that, but just a couple of tiny tweaks.
But one thing remains, which is if you are a doctrinal purist of any of the sects of Agile, we still invite you to be appalled by what we're about to say.
And if you believe you have committed any heresies or have anything you want to, make public about ways in which your Agile practice has gone wrong, I mean, we'll be doing a lot of that. And at the end, we hope to give people from the audience an opportunity to come up and say, these are some things which I used to believe that I now no longer do, or whatever. And we've got more post-it notes to write them on.
Okay, I'd like to take us back to the year 2001.
Mm-hmm.
If at that time you imagined a software engineer, you probably imagined some famous software engineer, you probably imagined, I don't know, maybe Bill Gates. Did I put it straight in his face?
Yeah.
You might have imagined Bill Gates, right? Or possibly, if you had read Time magazine, you might imagine Linus Torvalds,
who was on the cover that very year.
In that very year. So there's the context for you. What hadn't existed? Well, for a start, there was no Minecraft.
No Minecraft.
Okay, it's tough to realise, but it's true.
There was no Big Bang Theory. There was no the IT crowd, if you know UK telly.
But
all these things there weren't.
Things there were, yeah. Okay, let's start with one. The practice of extreme programming was approximately 2 years old.
But shall I use mine for this? Because mine.
How come he's got bigger post-it notes?
Stripy shirt, bigger post-it notes.
All right. The Psychology of Computer Programming. Excellent book. If you've never read it, check it out. Especially the concept of egoless programming. It's totally excellent. Well, you do one.
All right. The seminal essay, The Cathedral and the Bazaar.
Eric S. Raymond.
Who's read it?
Okay, that's not bad.
That's not bad. Oh yeah, okay. So my big features don't fit into your Scrum backlog. The Cathedral Bar, aged 4. Next up, this one really surprised us. We said we didn't know much about actual Agile methods in use in large companies. Scrum was 15.
15 years old.
No one else in this room was surprised by that. It was just us that were surprised by that. And if you'll permit me, I'd like to confess that I'd like to admit to my first heresy of the afternoon, of the afternoon session. You've done what?
Yeah, you keep talking. I'll catch up with you.
Okay. Scrum's a really stupid name. I'm so sorry for the Scrum devotees in the room, but my goodness, Scrum is a stupid name. Because I used to play rugby. This may not be surprise for someone of my vague shape, and I was thinner once, but I was still never actually thin.
A long time ago.
This is a Scrum. This is 2 packs, each of 8 people, colliding with malicious intent in order to get the ball out on their side. I struggle to think of a worse metaphor for effective team building across a delivery organisation. I mean, I'm not going to guess which of those 2 groups of Lego minifigs are developers and management. But I think we can all guess. It's just a dreadful metaphor. Sorry, I hope I didn't offend anyone. It was called rugby at one point, by the way, which is a much better metaphor, but Scrum sounds better.
Still a positive working environment, in my view.
Yeah. So, next, another thing that was available. Yeah, off you go.
The Post-it note had been in existence for 24 years.
Launched by 3M, 1977. Post-it notes of a size best suited to big ideas, much more recent.
That's a lie. They didn't exist until much later.
Yeah. stone. So there we have, that's the scene. That's the scene set. Those are the Apocrypha.
Like good scholars, we have established the historical context.
Yeah. So, next, we come to the first of the tenets. Right, I'm looking at your print. Right.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll tell you what, I'll give you an intro. The
Okay.
first tenet of the Agile
I'll put this in.
Manifesto, as written in 2001, is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. It's worth remembering that all of these tenets are prefixed with the excellent we value. Okay, so it's like they're not binary opposites. They're not antagonistic principles. It's simply a prioritization exercise. The original authors value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Where does that get you, Harry?
It gets me to a memory that this was 2001. The world was a very different place in 2001. Now, I think I know what they were railing against. I believe the original authors were railing against the slavery of the cube farm. They were railing against developers as an interchangeable army of clones to whom you would deliver some idea of what software should do, and after merciless management of these clone army, you would get software out the other end. And the problem with that, the problem with treating developers as slaves, is that absolutely nobody gives their best intellectual effort if that is how you treat them. If you treat people as slaves, then what you get out is simply adherence to what went in. And I have spent in my past a long time writing documentation. I'll come to this more. And the documentation that I used to send in was pretty awful. And I'm not sure it was all that atypical. So, individuals and interactions over processes and tools is railing against heavyweight process, treating developers as slaves, interchangeable slaves, as resource, perhaps, such that people in Stripe Research like myself could just get their software tasks done. And we think that what the original writers did was say, look, these people are individuals, we are individuals. If you treat us like individuals, your software will be better.
We hope that, for the most part, this battle is won. And we must obviously guard in our profession against the return to cube farm slavery that this tenet is supposed to guard against. But,
however, we think that times have changed. We think that treating programmers just as individuals nowadays might lead to some unfortunate consequences.
Would you like another slide?
No, I'm good. Yeah, another slide would be great. I'm good with this though. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll put this over here, it'll be fine.
Ready?
Yeah, go. Because what we want to guard against now, with our slight tweak, is the cult of the rock star. The rock star developer who will fix everything on their own. Partly because we've met a bunch of people who were like that, and most of them didn't actually... I'm not looking at anyone in particular, you just happen to be standing over there.
Do this without swearing.
Okay, sorry. Did I just swear? No. Good. So most of them actually don't manage to fix everything on their own. They might fix something else which is interesting, but it might not be the problem that needs solving. And just as we rail against the treatment of developers as a different set of people from those who give them their labour, we treat rockstar developers as antithetical to, never mind, as the right word, as different sorts of people to good team members.
I think most of you already know this from the laughter in the room. Rock stars and ninjas too are...
I've forgotten ninjas, but that's such a great graphic.
Teams, right?
Yeah. Okay. And also, when I sat in the presentation first up and listened to the psychology of this and the psychology of teamwork, I thought to myself, do you know what? In about 4 hours' time, I'm going to say roughly the same thing without any basis in actual research at all. I've just had some anecdotes. That's the bar going up for a good presentation today. Okay, That's fine. So, the unit of delivery is the team. Yes, there are developers. Yes, they do the coding. There are also the testers. There are also those people who think about the users. There are those people who think about user experience, etc., etc. The unit of delivery is the team. As well as thinking, perhaps, maybe not individuals so much, maybe team members, there is also
New heresy?
a new heresy, yes. Because treating...
Do you want to go forward?
No, I'm happy with that. We'll get around to it in a bit. I'll remember the context for that picture shortly.
So I go forward and then back again?
No, it's fine. It's fine. Oh yeah, body shopping. So, body shopping, the practice of thinking that you can just go out and say, look, can I have 3 developers, 1 tester and a front-end dev, and everything will be okay? Because that makes a team, right? It's got the right numbers of different sorts of skills in it, must be a team. Turns out, not so much. I talk about this a bit more, but they did it better first thing. Next up, other things that are poison to teams. You want to cover that one later. Oh, processes and tools. Yes. So, when we're talking about valuing stuff over other stuff, as we do throughout our gentle reflections on...
Yeah, I read it.
Okay, our gentle reflections on the Agile manifesto and how great it is, we shouldn't forget that it's over the second half, not instead of the second half. And we were reminded of the value of this by an Agile consultant, a coach who we met just before this presentation, who said, oh, you should remember... yes, you got damn right. Sorry, that was a swear, wasn't it? Sorry. Because we had actually forgotten that over is really important throughout the Agile manifesto. So, we remember that it was 2001, and GitHub didn't exist. I don't know how people develop software at all. But if you think about how modern tools like GitHub have revolutionised how teams are formed and collaborate, you don't have to think about that very often before you think, oh, actually, bit of tooling every now and again, quite useful. You'll talk about continuous integration later, I think. Yeah, because you always do. Another subject which we have covered really well earlier on. I've done that one.
Yeah, you're on the new heresy, I think.
Oh yes, okay. So this is the one which might actually get me burnt at the stake later on. I don't know if this has ever happened to any of you, where a really important feature has left the office on someone's shoe.
I mean, we love post-it notes, you can probably
we really love post-it notes. We really do. But they aren't actually a panacea. It's hard enough the first time, thank you. But they aren't a panacea to everything. And just because you use post-it notes, as we will prove, doesn't actually mean you are genuinely agile.
You can tell we are neither organised nor thoughtful.
You see? This one's yours though, I think, because this one affects you more than it affects me.
Oh, yeah, okay. So, I don't think I've even got a slide for this. No, I don't. I like to think of this as a heresy of oversharing. I mean, I spend a fair amount of time in daily stand-ups, I'm sure quite a lot of people in this room do. And they can become, as we're all aware, quite ritualised. But we can all fight against that. I think one of the things that... the heresy of oversharing is about a stand-up culture where people feel it necessary to report on what they did yesterday, even if that doesn't actually matter all that much to anybody else, right? Where instead of declaring what it is that's in your way, or expressing your hopes and aspirations for the future, you are essentially punching some kind of metaphorical time clock by reminding everybody in the team that you are productive. I work in a lot of remote teams, and I find this is particularly prevalent there. So I would like us to guard against the heresy of oversharing, of using stand-ups as a place to punch a time clock.
I used to work for a big American organisation where the point of your daily life was to make sure that you were remembered on the call. That's what you were... and this was really easy for me because I had the English accent. So, I think we are at the place where we value team interactions over processes and tools.
A tiny edit, right?
Only a tiny little tweak. And we've been speaking for half an hour.
Yeah, we actually need to go faster, which I don't think I'd ever say.
Nope.
Oh, good. We can move on to a new tenet, right?
Oh, yeah?
Can you put
yeah. Yep.
Alright, so I'd like to talk for a little about the tenet which tells us that we value working software over comprehensive documentation. I'm going to say a few things about this. The first one is fairly straightforward. I'm a bit worried about working software. I think we all are, right? I don't dispute that it's a good thing to deliver, but quite a lot of my work doesn't involve delivering working software. I don't know, like I might be writing a client, a UI client for an API which does not yet exist. That happens to me quite a lot in my life. I can't really call that working software. There are even stronger examples. How many people here have written code which they genuinely intended to throw away very, very quickly? Yeah, okay. It's kind of working software, but you also know it's inherently broken. It's bad software, okay? So I just want to get rid of that notion of, not rid of it, that's presumptuous. I'd like to modify that slightly, and think instead about useful software. For those two examples, the client for an API which does not yet exist, or a technical spike, or a prototype, or, my favourite thing of all, an experiment gone catastrophically wrong, those things are all examples of useful software, which are a perfectly sensible thing for a team to deliver, but I don't think they quite count as working. So I'll sub out working for useful in a bit. But the real issue starts with the question of documentation. Now, there is a heresy lurking here, which I have encountered. Many people, I've met teams that won't document their code because the code works. I've met teams that don't believe that comments are acceptable in source code because that is documentation and what they should focus on is working software. Has anyone encountered anything like any of those things? Just a little, you don't have to put your hands up, it's a bit embarrassing, just wait. Yeah, okay, I'm not alone. And to be honest, I have sheltered under this a bit myself, right? I've sheltered under it because I am a lazy man. And I like to write software, but when I get to the documentation part, somehow other things are more important suddenly and it doesn't quite get done. Don't get me wrong, I'm not sheltering under the manifesto here. That is lazy, stupid, and short-sighted, right? But that is not what the authors of the manifesto were talking about. The documentation they were talking about was not the kind that we should maybe, but probably don't write after the fact. It tells you what software does.
It wasn't the sort of documentation that he should be writing. It was the kind of documentation that I used to write.
Oh, could you give them an anecdote, please, Harry?
I could. So, I used to work for this large American corporation, and at one point I would write a market requirements document, a business requirements document, and then a functional specification. And I would become a little sad. For a start, that's a whole lot of work. And also, I would hand the functional specification to the development team and say, what do you think? And they'd say, well, that's awful. And I'd say, oh, okay. So have you ever seen a functional specification that was of any use in developing a piece of software? And they'd say, no. And then I didn't feel quite so bad, because it wasn't me, it wasn't my fault, it wasn't because I was writing dreadful functional specs, it was because writing functional specs is really hard and arguably not really useful.
Futile.
Yes.
So what goes right? Yeah, and you can see the sad situation of a whole tribe of developers and product managers, all saddened by the weight of overwhelming specification. This is a situation which the authors of the manifesto were warning us against. One where they were enslaved by documentation written ahead of the code.
Like, for example, description of a talk, which later turned out to be entirely inaccurate and misleading.
So we can fix this. We can fix this. And the way we're going to fix it is that instead of talking about working software, we'll talk about useful software, and instead of talking about over-comprehensive documentation, why don't we try this? What about useful software before comprehensive documentation? That strips away the heresy of laziness, gives us developers and other people who might have some responsibility for writing documentation, gives us nowhere in a manifesto to hide, no sacred text that we can hold up to justify our laziness. And it also reminds us that documentation is best done in an agile process when you need to do it, best done when you have a thing that is already useful, right?
And also, pleasingly, means you have to write as little of it as possible. Because you only have to document stuff that actually exists at the end of development.
Alright, shall we move on?
Yeah, we should. So, next. Yes. This is an example of customer... No, it's not. So this is the best picture we could find for the process of contract negotiation.
You might recognise the scene, and I think we used the wrong term for contract.
Yeah. This is in fact a Lego diorama of the war room in the White House while they were hunting down Osama bin Laden.
Flickr is truly a wonderful place.
And it's CC and everything. So that's the best metaphor we could find visually for customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And we both work for an organisation that has customers. Don't get me wrong, they are my dearest friends. Stripy shirt, remember? They are my dearest friends, and without our customers, we wouldn't have much in the way of budgets to write software. So they are of genuine importance to me, and collaborating with them is of genuine importance to me. I've never yet met a customer relationship that was fixed by checking to see what the contract said we would deliver. Because by the time you go into the filing cabinet, and that's where our contracts are, because they've got wet ink on, it's too late. The process of collaboration is absolutely essential to producing good software, I believe. Both collaboration with your customers and collaboration inside your team. But what this is missing, the people who are not on that blue magnetic chroma key board right yet, are people, and this is no revelation really.
This is not a great revelation. I think many people have said over the last 15 years or so that our industry has changed and we need to do a great deal more to take into account the needs, desires and wishes of the folk who use the software that we build.
So we have another triptych, another 3-slide diorama, customer, user, team, whereby, yes, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, but in fact, more importantly than the customer collaboration is delivering the software that actually has some utility to people, is worth delivering, and that involves a collaboration with our users as well.
So that's your tweak?
Yeah, it's alright. Tweak 3 out of 4 delivered.
I know what to do here.
Take all of the
Part of the next tenant. Oh, another slightly oblique slide. I'm sorry, he's got it's a map, it's a plan, it's kind of like a plan. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
So, the next tenet of the Agile manifesto is that we value responding to change over following a plan. I'm totally down with that, really I am. And to illustrate how far we are happy with it, I'd like to tell you a story. Okay, a little story. It's about a user story. I want you to imagine a completely fictional development team. Okay, and what they've done is they've got together to discuss a feature and they've written a user story collaboratively. It has gone very well. This is so far quite an ideal situation. So the user story, it has been written, and everyone's discussed it and agreed on it, and the developers have gone away to spend a bit of time actually writing some software, which they're delighted about because that's really kind of often what they're trying to hide it. So what happens next is that someone remembers the need for acceptance criteria and adds them to the user story, as many of us do, right? And the developers carry on developing. They have lots of conversations. They discover a few problems with the original. The user story was great, right? It was non-prescriptive. It was one of those user stories where if you showed it to 5 or 6 different people, they would all imagine a different way of implementing that feature. That, for me, is kind of the perfect thing. It's not prescriptive. Some of the developers and other people went away, start to deliver the feature, hit snag, rework things, and then they ask their friend in the test team to test the feature. He looks probably on Jira, I'm afraid. He looks on Jira at the story and he looks at the acceptance criteria and he discovers, oh my god, that the feature does not meet the acceptance criteria. In fact, the two are barely recognizable as related.
So what has gone wrong in this story?
Well, there's a really obvious thing that's gone wrong. One is that the person who wrote the acceptance, the moment that the acceptance criteria were written, they should have been in the room with the people writing the story. The whole thing should have been a team effort. So we're already spotting something wrong. There's some siloing going on in this team. Right?
It appears from our graphical representation of this process that we have one very intelligent person and then some other people who are kind of just doing what they're told at this point, right?
Nobody meant it to be that way, right? The person who wrote the acceptance criteria was just kind of doing their job and trying to help the whole team along. But most of the people in this room can see that something has gone awry here. And that actually isn't quite the point that I really want to make. We can see how that went wrong. But we can also see some really old-fashioned practices creeping back into the way this team works. What they did, by envisaging what the feature would look like right at the end of their process, is they kind of specified it up front. They kind of imagined the end state. They envisaged where they would be before they really started their journey of getting there. And the result of that is like a tiny little waterfall, right? It's a tiny one, a little one, but it's there. You can recognize the pattern. Right?
It's a bonsai waterfall. Now, don't get us wrong, this is better than building Niagara Falls and saying, can we have that and coming back in 6 months? And saying, you haven't fulfilled letter 3.c of the contract. It's definitely an improvement, but does it go far enough?
It's fractal as well. You know, those tiny little waterfalls, if you've got the wrong mindset, you can find them everywhere you look. All of a sudden, you can dig them up, and you end up finding that thousands and thousands of fractal little waterfalls all conspire to make a gigantic water fail. And somehow, you've done all the right things, and you've assumed the right roles, and most of the time, you know, your process might be fun. All processes are flawed, right? But you followed the scheme, and suddenly you find that the results are almost indistinguishable from the same old horrible things that used to happen to you before.
But how can that have happened? You're Agile. You had a meeting before a sprint.
So there's something here about responding to change and following a plan. And I thought when I started talking about this that I'd be saying, well, obviously what they should have done is responded to the change in the development process by iterating their acceptance criteria. Then I started to think maybe having the acceptance criteria there at all is kind of the seed of the problem there, because it is envisaging an end state.
And that's where we were when we did this presentation for the first time. But we've iterated a little bit since then. And now we think that what we should be doing is genuinely embracing change. So that atrocious metaphor on the picture before, the water fail, the big exciting, we hit something external to our team and we responded to it by, I don't know, realising there weren't enough light bulbs, whatever. We were responding to an external change. We weren't coming up with change ourselves.
It's not just enough to be responsive to change. We have to remember that the Agile manifesto is called a manifesto. Properly, it is a political document, right? It asks for a kind of revolutionary change. The word isn't just tacked on as a marketing gimmick. It's there because the authors genuinely intend to produce a constant cycle of revolutionary change, both in the industry and in individual teams, right? This is why, I mean, we still see it passed down in the way that we reflect upon our own practice and try and improve it. Okay, this is a kind of perpetual Kaizen revolution, where we don't envisage the end state, we just march perpetually in progress towards something better.
This is what we think we should be welcoming, a revolution that continues and readdresses its first state. To be honest, we could actually have put up the Toyota logo instead. Because a lot of this we stole from the car industry, I'm afraid.
Alright, so I would like, when we last gave this talk, we wanted to say that we'd like to embrace change over following a plan, as our little tweak to this part. Increasingly we feel we're not going far enough, and that we would like to invite, to seek, to desperately seek change at all times.
Hang on, I'm trying to post it now.
Sorry, am I rambling?
No, you're good. I'm just trying to write the post now.
Okay. Seek, invite, constantly pursue change. You know what I'm after.
So, here's where we are now. We are going one step forward from embracing change, and we are inviting change over following a plan.
We have just got to the end of our diatribe on the fourth tenet of the Agile manifesto.
We have.
Shall we reflect?
Let's reflect. Let's rest a while. Let's pause.
Take it easy.
Yeah. So, where's that? Where did you just put that?
What, did you need it?
Yeah.
I'll find it, you talk.
Okay, so we've gently reflected on the Agile manifesto. Thank you. Because we found in our research that actually, really good. Go back and reread it, go back and reflect on it, and think again, and just go back to the original text and have a look at it without all the stuff that's around it, because it's really worth refreshing those 4 tenets. One day we might do the 12 principle version of this, and then you'll all be yawning after 3 hours. But in the meantime, we would like to say that we value team interactions over processes and tools. We'd like to say we value customer collaboration over contract negotiation. No, we don't. Collaborative delivery over contract negotiation. Where's the other two?
I don't know. Just keep talking.
All right, you've got invited change.
I've got useful software before.
Oh, good, let's do that, yeah. Useful software before comprehensive documentation and...
The additional one, you've got the new one.
Oh, you've got the new one.
Oh, invite
That is the new one.
change over following a plan.
Oh, yeah,
And there's a list tenet, which everyone agrees on.
Something, 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 users.
Everyone knows they should be in there somewhere, but no one can figure out where to put them.
Yeah. And if you can do all of that, all 4 of those slightly reimagined tenets, or there it is.
Better late than never. If you can reflect on this in your team, if you can encourage people, especially if you can encourage people to pursue perpetual team revolution,
then you'll be, well, a darn sight better than Harry Harrold,
or me,
or Rupert Redington. You'll be as good as Neon Tribe, our
at its
company.
very best, probably better to be honest.
Probably, yeah.
And you'll also be... Wait, where did they come from?
Awesome.
Oh,
And
there's
isn't
that.
awesome? That's the everything is awesome slide.
We've got a bit. Never mind. You will be some kind of wandering, agile...
Monkey guru thing.
person. Sorry for the chaos.
So, we're not sorry, we're reveling in chaos. We did, yeah, it's
We
fine.
did say at the beginning that
Because
we would invite you, in lieu of any questions which we are not qualified to answer, we would invite you to submit to our working group here any additional heresies or strange behaviours or interesting quirks that you yourselves have witnessed in the workplace. It is totally acceptable at this point in time to remain bashfully silent.
we also promise to our customers that we will offer fixed cost, fixed time, and we will flex on content or features. So, what is the time?
We're 13 minutes early.
Oh,
Yeah.
great, call for now. So we are absolutely going to come in on time, that's 2 minutes faster than we thought. That's brilliant. So it's a flex on content. But the next question is, so how about you? Has anyone got anything they would like to admit to?
Brothers and sisters, would anyone like to testify?
Would anyone like to confess?
Perfect, let's have an author.
I've got one.
Have you?
Yeah, I've got 2 actually. The first one is this, which I heard quite a lot recently. When a new... Are we recording this, by the way?
Say no names.
When an unnamed Agile consultant, when someone came into a project and said, right, we'll have 2-week sprints, 2 weeks, then 2 weeks, then 2 weeks, then 2 weeks. And I thought to myself, hang on, how are we going to sprint continually for an entire 3-month section of work?
Forever, sounds kind of exhausting, though.
Because I can't sprint for more than about maybe 10 seconds before I get a bit out of breath. And I am pretty sure that there is no development team that can genuinely sprint for any length, like really concentrated, head down. If I had a picture of Usain Bolt as a Lego creature, I would be using it right now. Like a proper sprint for all of 3 months. And we worked out that what they actually meant was, we'll sprint during the afternoons, and we'll prepare for the next sprint in the mornings. And that doesn't sound entirely sustainable to me.
So the heresy of continuously sprinting.
The heresy of continuously sprinting. Now, it's possible I just don't know what they really meant. let's not rule that out. But, and I'm all in favour of like a continuous flow of work that varies in tempo, because I love the last day of a sprint, when you're in the office with the dev team, with everyone else who needs to be in the office for the end of that sprint, and you are literally throwing post-it notes around with extraordinary abandon as features don't make it into this sprint and the code is pulled out because it won't make this sprint and it will be in the next sprint. And things are reprioritised and bugs rise up and features go. I love that crunch, but I wouldn't want to do it every Friday.
All right.
So I think some sort of variation
of
on
a continuous sprint.
next. Oh yeah, the other thing, oh sorry.
This is their bit.
Yeah, I know, sorry.
Anybody? Alright, enough.
We could just let him go, actually. It's coffee.
Thank you very much indeed, everybody. I have to stop him or he will go on forever.
It's true.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.